This video I'm going to show you how to do a front shock replacement on a 2001 two-wheel drive coil front suspension Ford Ranger. This is the 3-liter Ranger. I ordered the shocks from rockauto.com. I got all 4 shocks, front and rear, both sides, for I think around 76 bucks or 78 bucks shipped to my house. I really couldn't turn down that deal. So I got them in the mail. They came in about 4 days from California all the way to Michigan, so that was awesome shipping, real quick shipping. Good price. From what I've heard, they have awesome customer service. So here's what the top of the shock looks like. The setup for putting this together is going to be a washer with the cup side facing up, which the shock is going to go like this. So you face that up, you put on one of the bumpers. Then the top of the shock mount, the metal part that attaches to the vehicle, is going to go on next. Then you put on the other bumper. Then you put on the other cup piece, washer, facing down so that it cups those two bushings together, and then the nut's going to go on top. That's going to be the layout. And then there's 2 built-in bolts on the control arm with a nut that just screws onto the bottom to hold those bottom 2 in place. So that's how the layout's going to go. The tools you're going to need a 13mm socket, a 19mm to get the wheels off. I got some vice grips, a torque wrench, hammer, and a crowbar because this is Michigan and all the bolts on this are going to be rusty, so I'm going to end up cutting most of them off with a cutoff wheel or an angle grinder. So here's the old shock. It's in really bad shape. It was squeaking real bad. It's extremely rusty. Basically pretty much getting to the point where it was dangerous to drive on. So I ended up cutting off the top piece. This was on there like that. And then that bolt was on the top with this in the middle. And I just used an angle grinder to cut it off. So to the point, you're going to need 2 jacks. It works best this way in my opinion. Use 1 jack there. Make sure you use a jack stand. Before you jack up the vehicle, remove the cap so you can get to the lug nuts and remove all 5 or loosen all 5 lug nuts, then jack up the vehicle, then remove all 5 lug nuts and take the wheel off. Alright, after you got the wheel out, you're going to need to pop off these clips and get this splash guard out of the way. Pop off 4 of them and leave the one hanging just so you don't have to remember how it goes. Alright, now that you got that splash guard out of the way, there's the top of the shock. Goes through the coil spring. There's the bottom of the shock. There's 2 bolts that mount down there for the bottom of the shock. I know that this bolt is going to be, or this nut is going to be a pain to get off of the vehicle. On the other side, I used a 15mm socket on here, grabbed the top with some vice grips, and ended up breaking off the top of the bolt. So I'm not even going to bother trying to take the bolt off. I'm just going to cut it off with a cutoff wheel. Before I cut off that top part, I'm going to undo these 2 bolts in the bottom just so that they're a little bit more stable, and that way the shock doesn't fall while I'm trying to take out those nuts right there. They're 13mm, should come off pretty easy. Take off both of them. There's the 2 13mm bolts or nuts from off the bottom. You're going to need to reuse these, so make sure you don't damage them or strip them. Now I'm going to put on my safety glasses and cut off the top part of this shock and nut. There's the old shock removed. If you end up having to cut off that bolt in the top, be careful not to hit your brake line there, and be careful where your sparks are flying. Now I got the old shock off, I'm going to install the new one, which is right here. When you install the new one, bolt in the bottom first. I just put the nuts on there enough just to hold it on, and then make sure the top is through the hole, obviously, otherwise it won't fit. And then you may have to compress the front suspension with a separate jack. Make sure you have your jack stand and your other jack in place. You may have to compress the suspension a little bit in order to get enough of that bolt or enough of that shock to stick up in order to get that second bushing, that second washer, and the nut on. Now I've got the shock through the hole. Now you're going to want to put on your rubber bushing, which goes on like that. Put on the washer, which goes on like that, and then put on the nut, and see how the nut won't screw on? That's because you need to compress that suspension a little bit. So I'm going to jack up the front with A-arm right there with my jack, and then I should have plenty of slack to put the nut on. Now I've got that nut on there and somewhat tightened down. I'm going to throw some vice grips on the top to hold the shock still while I snug up this bottom nut. Now that I've got that all together, I'm going to finish tightening up those two 13mm bolts on the bottom right there. And then put everything back together in the same order that I took it apart. And while I'm under here, I'm going to go ahead and grease my move ball joints, top and bottom, because they're greasable.